guys, welcome back. Today I've got Dr. Jonathan Brakarsh with me. He's a clinical psychologist and the founder of the Post-COVID Treatment Network Africa, which is we'll talk a little bit about
it's
that.
It's a mouthful.
But I'm very excited to know a little bit more about that. And he's also just has such a special interest for helping people through chronic pain and just finding ways to overcome or live better with chronic pain. So we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation and see how it goes.
Great.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Well, welcome.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Good.
So should we start off with this post-COVID treatment network?
Yes, that's fine. Okay, great. So basically, during the height of post-COVID, and now we still do it, but not as much, I saw so many people who were complaining of sleep problems, chronic pain, not getting any better, doctors basically saying it's in your head in the beginning. And the fact is it has over 200 different symptoms. So often what happened is people were being misdiagnosed and they began to think they were going crazy in some way.
Yeah.
Right? And then they had to deal with a second hurdle, which is once they knew what it was, they weren't getting any better. So my interest has always been, what happens when you're not getting any better? What happens when medicine can't help you anymore? How do you deal with it psychologically? And that came out of an interest of mine when I had chronic fatigue syndrome very, very intensely for 18 months. And I still have resurgences. So we're talking about 35 years later.
Right.
And then my son had it as well. So I had to deal with him for 4 years.
Yeah. Do you want to, I've also struggled with chronic fatigue syndrome. And mine's probably been about 10 years now. And I just remember really feeling really tired so it was like my first year, and kind of going to a doctor and saying, I feel like I'm bone tired. Like it feels like it's in my bone.
Exactly.
And I mean, he just dismissed me at that point, and he was like, if you can't handle chiropractic school, you should probably leave, is what he said.
Wow.
And that, maybe just my stubbornness and my strong desire to become a chiropractor just was like, just shelve it. There's nothing they can do, and just kind of push through it. So the next 10 years later, I'm working as a chiropractor, and all of a sudden I have a bunch of symptoms and chronic fatigue to the point of having to treat my patients and go sleep in my car and get up and go back to work. And then eventually kind of saying, okay, I really actually need to stop running tests. I need help. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about chronic fatigue in terms of what is it, and kind of what's helped you.
Yeah. I also wanted to hear from you about what helped you as well.
Yeah, of course.
And also, how do you push through it? But I guess we can save that for a little later.
Yeah.
So, chronic fatigue is generally caused by two main viruses, but often a third. So it's Epstein-Barr, it's something called Coxsackie, and then the third one is called cytomegalovirus. Okay, and so when the viral load gets high, you feel it.
Right.
So basically the challenge is how do you boost your immune system? And that takes time, it takes a certain mindset. And I think just dealing with that sense of hopelessness is so important, because I think you try and your immune system just isn't boosting. Well, you don't even know what you need to do. Because also you talked about being bone tired. That idea that you wake up in the morning and did you feel like you were hit by a truck?
Yes, and then the truck reversed and then all over again. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
What was your experience with that? Just that same sort of tiredness, right?
And it was horrible. Yeah, because I couldn't concentrate. The other thing I found, and I think we mentioned it before, is that I had a time limit on my energy. So that was 2 hours. That was it. And so after 2 hours, I think we mentioned before, I could look at a ceiling, and I don't even know it was a ceiling. I just didn't have the mental energy to register.
No, of course. I think that was also one thing that was really scary for me was forgetting things and kind of questioning what was going on with my memory, right? Because now all of a sudden it's like stuff that I should remember, or just trying to process something simple, or driving. I mean, driving was exhausting because it was, obviously, driving in Zim can be, a lot of, you need a lot of attention and you're in fight or flight mode anyways, and I guess maybe that's another thing is just, I reckon a lot of what contributed to my chronic fatigue and maybe my immune system being so depressed was just the amount of stress I had put myself under, and I attribute a little bit of it to this like hustle culture, you know, where it's like you've got to go, you've got to do, like you've got to achieve, and you have to have a purpose and a mission and a vision, and my body was kind of, I put myself at the back end of the, you know, the mission, you know, that I, you know, really feel like I wish I could have done it differently, you know. I wish I could have slept more, you know, maybe ate a little bit better, really been more conscious of how to take care of my body.
But the beauty of chronic fatigue syndrome is it makes you retreat from all those societal values because you can't do them anymore, right? So I almost found myself, and it sounds perhaps like you too, sitting back at a distance because after 2 hours I was exhausted, right? And one of the things you're saying is mental energy equals physical energy. So driving in Zimbabwe was as exhausting as running 500 meters, right? And it would just exhaust you. So I found that finally I just had to step back and begin to question, is this really how I want to live according to society's edicts, to have more achievement, to get more recognition, to get on the internet more. And it all seems so crazy to me, quite frankly, in that state.
Did you struggle with a little bit of the shame when you first started, kind of stepping back from societal norms? You know, was there a little bit of, or was it easy? You know, I mean, it could have been different for the both of us.
Yeah.
You know?
I think the only way it would be easy is if I was an alcoholic and I was drinking myself into a stupor, but I'm not. So no, it wasn't easy. I think it was a combination of shame and frustration, because for months I kept trying to make myself do it. Right, because I was working in a hospital where we saw sexually abused children, right? And it was very, very intense because every day we would see kids who were raped or sexually abused, right, from 8 to 5. And it got to a point where I couldn't, as you said, I couldn't think fast enough. I was used to thinking fast and being able to assess, diagnose, and treat.
Right.
And my brain wasn't turning over. It was like an engine that refused to turn over. Yeah. And I would just be stuck on a thought and I couldn't go any further. Does that happen to you?
Yes. Yeah. And I think the frustration, I have to say yes, because maybe my personality, I call it a personality trait. I'm shifting a little bit into understanding now how, you know, a mood can become a temperament, can become a personality. And I'm understanding that for a long time I've called myself things like perfectionist and a go-getter and driven. And there's nothing wrong with those things, I don't think, but when you're on the furthest extreme of it, is I was, you know, the story of me having to sleep in my car and go and treat my patients isn't a story that I'm wanting an accolade for. You know what I mean? In fact, it was the moment that I could actually say, no, I need to rest. Like, no, I can't work 6-7 days a week. But I mean, I went through a lot of shame. You know, it was because it felt like I was a failure. Like, I should be working, and then you scroll on social media, and then it's either this hustle culture of like sleep 4 hours, and you know, it's like that's what you see, or it was other people around me achieving stuff, and just this hyper competitive kind of nature that I'm starting to understand is also part of the chronic fatigue, in a sense of, or at least what I would think as the altered nervous system, right? A sympathetic fight or flight nervous system is, in order for your brain to survive, you've got to be able to be hyper analytical, and that can somewhat make you hyper competitive, because now the person that has 200 more likes on social media becomes a threat, and maybe not because they're an actual threat, but because your brain's already in survival mode and everything is already a threat. So I dealt with a lot of big feelings of, you know, shame, condemnation, self-condemnation, but then also just like having to deal with my not enoughness. You know, and I guess as a clinical psychologist, this is stuff that I'm assuming, and we can talk a little about it, is like, how do you dive into like the root cause of some of these big emotions when we're going through this stuff?
Yeah. And one of the problems or challenges with all these societal norms, as you're calling them, higher grade norms, which are abnormal.
Oh, it's so abnormal, but
Yeah.
common, but not, well, yeah, common but not normal, maybe is what we should say.
All this thing about the hyper-competitiveness and who won more prizes and who has more likes and all that, is it takes us away from ourselves, right? So I found more and more there was a huge chasm between my public self and my private self, right?
Yeah.
And what chronic fatigue syndrome did for me was that it wiped out my public self. I couldn't do it anymore. So then I was stuck in my private self.
Right.
And I was looking at a distance. It was almost like I was looking at my public self through this long tube, this long telescope, right? Yeah. And just seeing it, and I couldn't get there. So I had to let go of it. And as I got better, which took 18 months to 2 years, I began to, and as I began to kind of hook into my public self again, I had to be really careful to try to not get on that treadmill and look at the craziness of those values.
Right,
Yeah.
right.